We are live, and we are today discussing in the second ever Fair Go Basic Income Discussion Group. We'll be discussing bullshit jobs in memory of David Graeber. So the topic is bullshit jobs. I'm joined by a wonderful crowd of participants. Last month when we did this, we had a special guest on. We had a member of the Greens who was helping us understand their particular basic income proposal. We don't have a member of the Greens. We don't have a special guest today. What we've got is instead an article that we're going to read because in doing a tribute to David Graeber, who, for those of you who don't know, is an anthropologist and social critic who passed away at the beginning of the month, or the end of last month. Anyhow, just after our last meeting when we were planning this one, he just passed away. And he's famous for many things. He wrote a book called Debt, The First 5,000 Years, which is a very interesting look at the history of debt. He was part of the Occupy movement and is credited with coining the phrase, "We are the 99%." And he's also in 2013 wrote an article called "On the Phenomenon of Bullshit Jobs," which was today's recommended but not compulsory reading. He also then went on to write a book on the same topic. I haven't read the book, I'll admit that. So if anybody has read the book, they've kind of got a one-up on me. Michael Haynes has, and Josh have both read the book. So great, you can tell us perhaps at some stage we'll come around to what's in the book that's not in the article. But before we do that, I wanted to get break the ice and talk to everyone. So what I'm going to do, I'll go first, is we're going to go around and we're going to hear who you are, where you're from, and what's a bullshit job, bullshitty or otherwise, that you have had. Now, I've got two jobs that I wanted to discuss, which are kind of bullshit jobs. One is classic, I'm Austin, I'm from Sydney originally, currently on the far south coast, a town called Bermagui, moving to the Blue Mountains soon. I have had two bullshit jobs that I'd like to talk about. One is a classic bullshit job, which was telemarketing for something. I don't even remember what I was selling. I don't know if it was insurance or timeshares in a house or something like that. It was just pure telesales. All I remember is hating my life and wanting to die when I had to keep my dial rate up to call people who didn't want to hear from me to sell something that I didn't believe in. That's the worst of the, I've had other telesales jobs as well for charities and stuff, but this was the worst. And another job, this is now the first job I ever had, was one of those koalas who used to wander around with buckets, collecting for the Wilderness Society, saying, "Have you got change? Have you got change?" And so that's kind of a bullshit job because we shouldn't have had to do it. I think the Wilderness Society and environmental activists do good work, but really in a functioning, they're trying to solve a problem that shouldn't need to be solved. So perhaps they're what David Graeber would call duct tapers. So they're running around trying to solve a problem after the fact, which should just get solved once and for all, and we should have proper environmental protections. Instead, we have hippies chaining themselves to chainsaws and the Wilderness Society raising money to put ads on TV and so on. Now, so that was kind of fun, that job though, as well, especially as I was a teenager. Now, what I'm going to get everybody to do as well is look down on the bottom of your screen. There's a button that says "More," and under that there'll be you'll be the option of raising your hand. Right, so I want everyone to put their hand up. We're going to be using this throughout, so this is a good drill for us to all get the hang of it. Okay, Michael Spice has got his hands up. Josh, you had your hand up for a second, then you put it down. I want everyone who wants to tell us about their bullshit job, please raise your hand, and then we'll go around and you'll take them down once I've spoken to you, so I don't lose track of who's spoken as well.
Yeah.
So
I haven't got a hand.
if you go to "More" at the bottom of your screen,
I haven't got a more.
Is it three dots?
Or try participants.
Participants. Yeah, participants. More.
Oh, is it under participants? I'm sorry. I don't have the button. As the host is the one button I don't have. Okay. Munley's got his up. Michael's got his up. Michael's got his up. Rosemary, Stephen. Yep. Okay. Everyone's got it up now. Let's go to, I'm going to start with Michael Spicer. Why don't you tell us about a job you've had, bullshitty or otherwise, and where you're from?
Yeah, I'm just in a study room. I was just trying to message it into the chat. I said that I worked at a supermarket, and I'm really into digital, and I don't think it's necessary to put up all this rubbish. They were called bobbers, and these other little plastic clips, and they would break and you threw them away. Just this laminated, unrecyclable plastic on cardboard, and it was just buy this 2-for-1 shampoo, and I was like, this doesn't need to be here. And I'm a student, so I do a number of these bullshit jobs, and they're just not necessary. And it was just creating a whole bunch of rubbish. And I even said to them, you know, more high-tech solution would be, you know, with people having their phones, that they should just get a personalized weekly pamphlet of the things that they'll be most interested in buying. They just don't need to put up all this, you know, marketing material. And they had a fancy name for it to try and make it sound important: merchandiser, marketing, you know, agents. And it was like, nah, it's just making rubbish.
There you go, merchandising marketing agent at a supermarket, putting up plastic signs for the specials and so on. I always think that the supermarkets, there's a huge amount of streamlining that could happen there. People talk about the self-checkouts. I always say, why don't we have the checkouts on the shopping trolley, right? So you swipe it as you put it in your trolley, and then you know what your bill is as you're going. It could tell you the calorie count. It could tell you the specials, like you were saying. You could more automation, which Josh I know is into. I'm pro automation. Okay, so that's Michael. Can you now lower your hand, and so I don't get confused and come back to you? Okay, great. Munley, well, let's go to you. Let's tell us about a job that you've had that was either bullshit or not.
Yeah, okay. So can everyone hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you great.
All right, okay. So I've been fortunate enough to largely avoid a lot of bullshit jobs just by planning my life in a way that minimizes working, like keeping costs low and whatever. But the only bullshit job that I was not able to avoid was the bullshit job that I had to take just for Nice in Australia, back when I was on it, and only because they forced me into some kind of consulting crap to get on it, right? And it was a job where essentially I was just going through an interface and mindlessly clicking follow on Twitter followers that I would search up. And I mean, like, this could be automated. It could have I could have scripted the job in a freaking week, but then or probably like a day, and then they wouldn't have needed me anymore, and then I wouldn't have met my needs requirements and and whatever. So basically, I wasted my own time to keep the stupid thing going, because essentially, like, it was still like relatively small, but like 10 to 20 hours or whatever, just enough to make them happy. But it would have been better to get on these or even have a UBI without even needing to do it, because having to do this bullshit job and doing bull crap from Nice also meant that, plus the socialist government requirements, like minimum wages and whatever, like it kept me from it basically killed the business. Me jumping through the bureaucratic loopholes, literally killed the business that they wanted me to start. I would also argue too that they wouldn't let me charge less than $75 an hour, like as a government requirement.
So this is kind of a double whammy. You've got a bullshit job and a welfare hoop that you've got to jump through.
And a bullshit, and a bullshit thing. I mean, like 75, a lot. You can live for a lot less than 75 an hour, but they wouldn't let me charge less than that. Just to get the business up, assuming, I was doing the consulting, which is not what I applied for Nice to do, right? But they just wanted me to have it just for, I don't know, like daily income, despite the fact that they were paying me to not need a daily income. It's stupid. But yeah, there was that other stupid requirement. Yeah.
For those who don't know, NEIS is the New Enterprise Initiative Scheme, which is where the government pays you to try and gives you the welfare payment while you try and start a business. And I've been on it when I was a freelance journalist, so I was starting a media business of me selling articles to people. And then, of course, it didn't work because I had to go overseas. I actually got a job of reporting for a magazine and had to go overseas to report on the story. And that meant I got kicked off the payment because I was out of the country for any period during the thing. So anyhow, let's go to Rosemary. Do you want to tell us where you're from and a job that you've done?
Okay, I'm in Melbourne or Hawthorne East, closer. Probably the most bullshit job I had was telephone selling The Age. 1 week free if you sign up for 12 months. It was many years ago, and I wasn't very good at it.
Okay, having
To
done
follow a silly
telesales,
script.
I think telemarketing is the hardest possible industry to defend, because we'll get to this later, but I think Graeber's wrong to try and write off whole industries. That most industries have some useful applications. That maybe we don't need as much of them, but telemarketing is the hardest. I can't think of any good arguments for why telemarketing should exist. Let's go to Laurie. Manly, can you put down your hand before I forget and come back to you? And let's go to Loriana.
Hi, hello, Austin. Hello, everyone. Well, I've had a series of bullshit jobs. I've spent the past 13 years of my life as a migrant mainly. So there is even an added layer there. So migrants are usually one of the most vulnerable categories in terms of getting into the bullshit jobs and all other jobs that people with other protections, usually citizens, don't really necessarily have to go into. So for example, we're in Australia, because when I arrived here 6 years ago, I was on a working holiday. So you have to do farm job, which per se is not a bullshit job. It could be even very rewarding on many levels. But the real situations is that workers are exploited there. And so, yeah, there was definitely bullshit job what went on. Like there was still the woofing. So they would give you shelter and accommodation for 8 hours work in the field, no pay. And the other proper bullshit job that I had in Brisbane was a debt collector. And that is the hardest thing. And I do it because I had to survive. Like I had no money, literally. And I only lasted 1 month. I was going back home crying. And that makes you see like this sort of desperate jobs, like the kind of psychological work that they do on you as well. So you must be so desperate to completely lose your compassion and having people and that you do understand, because they're probably as desperate as you, crying over the phone, and also this pressure for management. So yeah, that's a short.
I'm going to push back a little bit here. I think the farm work might just be a regular shit job. It might not be a bullshit job. It might just be a shit job. So there's a distinction between bullshit jobs and shit jobs. So a shit job is a job that's just that's maybe not paid highly enough, but it's a job that we probably want to exist. Depending on that, we can get into it. There's also massive overproduction in almost every area, including food, right? So, and with the debt collecting, I think it's probably a second tier bullshit job. Because if we had a UBI or we had decent wages or we had a better social system, people wouldn't be getting into these debts to start with, and we wouldn't need to be chasing them down. But can a credit company exist without debt collectors, without some process of chasing the people who own?
How many debts, and the interest rates? How many of these debts are not really honest debts? And I was following up many cases in which, you can go after people in that way, basically. And that is
just playing devil's advocate. I'm sure you're right.
Sometimes they get into debt because they're being persuaded by the marketing.
Also.
They're vulnerable. They're often vulnerable people who get into debt they don't need and wouldn't have if they weren't being pressured. By the
predatory lending and aggressively marketed lending. Yeah. Let's go to Tom Osborne, who's my old neighbor from where I lived across the road from my dad's house. So good to see you, Tom. Thanks for joining.
Hi, Austin. Yeah, I've known Austin since he was about 12 years old, which is a few years ago.
Yeah. Just a few.
My background is I used to be a mathematician and then an academic. Currently, I advise startups in a technical way and in a strategic way, so the wheels don't fall off and the startups go well. I'll confess to having worked in marketing, or at least marketing research, as a consultant, but that was to make it a bit more honest by using predictive models to align a product offer with a customer's needs. So it's a kind of
what you're talking about would be removing the work that Michael was describing as bullshit before. He was saying that, we have, rather than spraying advertising at everyone indiscriminately with plastic tags, you have something that's more targeted and that might actually be what people want.
Yeah, the intention's to make it a one-to-one offer, the right thing for what the person would want and need now, communicated in the right way. Of course, it doesn't always work properly, because if you buy socks from, say, the Iconic, they might think you need to buy more socks, but you've got a drawer full of socks.
Yeah, you buy. I've always done that thing where, I bought this microphone, and then I was being advertised microphones constantly for weeks and weeks. It's like, well, I only needed one, guys. Anyhow, that's
my close to a shit job was a really interesting job, but the CEO was a psychopath and a libertarian. So I was there for about 3 months.
Well, a good job can probably make any job bullshit. Let's go to Stephen. How are you, Stephen?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm on the Central Coast, New South Wales. I think I've used up the budget of a few university departments. Like, they just had enough. They have to spend the money within that time frame, and so I've ended up doing stuff. I can't even remember what it was. It was just like a report or something, or they just had to use the money. But the only other thing I can think of is I've volunteered at a few film festivals, and a lot of that, you end up just watching the films. Like, sometimes you'll scan the people to go into the cinema, their ticket, and then that's it, and then you just stand around for a couple of hours, but that's volunteering. So,
well, unpaid bullshit jobs, probably a whole separate category we could get to.
yeah.
Let's go to, we've got Charles and Michael that we've got to go to. We're going to, and Anna, although Anna hasn't put her hand up. So we'll do Charles first, and then Michael, and then we'll come to Josh who's been waiting. He'll be the last one that we do of these. Charles, go ahead.
Hi guys, I'm also in lockdown in Melbourne, and I must have lived a charmed life, because I haven't had what by any definition was a bullshit job. I practice, as have done for about 20 years, as a futurist, and everything I've done before that's led to that, and I'm pleased with everything else I've done. So sorry to rain on I feel sorry for all those people that have had to do those sorts of bullshit jobs, but I haven't.
We'll see what Michael says, but I'm beginning to feel that there's a bit of a generational gap, that millennials are more likely to have experienced bullshit employment. Michael, how about you? Have you had a really bullshitty job?
Well, I think it's the case that a lot of the young people do get bullshit jobs. And so I did have, when I was starting out in my early 20s, I ended up selling encyclopedias under commission. And that was a really terrible job, because you would go around knocking on people's doors, and basically quite poor people, because they were the targets, selling them on the basis that these encyclopedias would be incredibly valuable for their kids, and it'll help them get a better go in life than they did. But you would sign them up and convince them it was only 40 cents a packet of cigarettes a week as a cost over 10 years, but you were never allowed to sell it on that basis. You had to get them to agree to pay the money up front. And so you did a whole script that you were taught how to present it, and you would get them to sign this up. And basically I did that for a few months until I realized what a terrible thing I was doing, because in the end I knew that these encyclopedias would not give the value, and they were really expensive, like equivalent of thousands of dollars today people were committing to buy these encyclopedias. So that was the worst bullshit job I had. But other than that, I've been a bit lucky, like Charles, that through my life, though I've probably been employed to do some bullshit jobs, I've never actually done the job I was employed to do. I've always steered it into a direction that I thought at least provided some value. So, and I think that once you get off that bottom tier, that is the opportunity for everybody to be able to identify the value that you could add and to try and get around the system, because the system will inevitably push you to tick the boxes, do the work, because it's a heck of a lot easier for the guy above you to manage that process than having people go off in wild directions. So I think a lot of the bullshit jobs are actually further up the chain.
I think David Graeber would agree with that, but we'll circle back around to that. Josh, we're going to get Josh to tell us about his bullshit jobs and also give us an update. Josh is sort of the convener or facilitator of Basic Income Australia, the group that is putting this on. And so he's going to give us an update on basic income news and what's up with that after he tells us about his bullshittiest job.
Okay, so before I talk about my bullshittiest job, I just want to say I've got 5 news stories. 2 of them are bad and 3 of them are good. I could just talk about the good ones. Okay, so my bullshittiest job was working at a bakery. And when we were busy, what our job was to pick up the croissants and hand it to the customers in exchange for money. So it's literally just picking up a croissant. We're not making them, not doing anything else. We're just picking up a croissant. And when it was slow, what we did was we folded the takeaway boxes. So we'd stand there folding boxes for hours.
So these are both jobs you think could have been automated
or
just designed out of existence. They
Yes.
probably like the handing of the croissants, you probably didn't even need a machine. Just the people reach into the tray themselves or whatever.
Right. A bit of trust maybe, or a differently designed system. I like Amazon Go, that model. You were talking about supermarkets before. That's an automated supermarket in America. They've got a few stores. All right. Do you want me to talk about all the news or just the good news?
Let's get the bad. Let's do the bad news first and get it out of the way, and we'll try and move through it fairly quickly. You're muted. You're muted.
I have my mouse on the keyboard. Sorry. There we go. All right. A bit of bad news that at first seemed like good news was a new paper out by some prominent basic income advocates. I'm just popping it in the chat. So this is Elise Klein, this is Troy Henderson, this is, who else was involved? Tim Dunlop, Jane Goodall, John Quiggin. And you think, great, it's going to be about a livable income guarantee. Upon further inspection, it's a job guarantee. Because what they're saying is that everybody should be given an unconditional livable wage on the condition that they do work. And they want to expand the definition of what that work looks like, but that's what most job guarantee advocates are campaigning for. So it's a bit depressing to read.
Did they term that participation? Was that?
Yeah, it's the participation income idea.
So is this that other group we've discussed before? Is this related? Is this the think tank that's associated with what do they call? We've Stephen and Josh, you've talked about them before. The income, livable income, or life, or something that they're called, something really generic like
Loriana is involved with that.
Yeah.
Oh, so it's not life. That's another thing. So the living wage. So this policy proposals that they wrote. So what happened? It was a split between the UBI core group and some of us. We went, no, universal basic income. It's unconditional. And then there was another part of the group, which is mainly the authors of this paper, who thought it would be more politically feasible to go in a step-by-step direction. So this is what is happening. It's not that they do not truly believe in the idea of universal basic income. It's just them trying to make some compromises, but they do say, and I do fully share the criticism that Josh mentioned, but they do mention at the end of this report that the final aim should be a universal and unconditional basic income, and they see this as a way of getting there. But what they are proposing essentially is a participation income. So there is a broadening of what can be accepted as work. Yes, for example, you're not removing the whole bureaucracy and administration and the conditioning, and it's still done on yeah, it's still conditional on some sort of activity test. You need to be doing, which is not taking us over the next step, which is just the right of being. So yeah.
This is the thing is, well, not just you have to be doing, you have to prove it to somebody, and you have to get through and make the call and log into the website, and it's all got to work. I spent hours today answering, just going yes, no, yes on the phone with Centrelink to keep my parenting payment. The administrative work is always just this Kafkaesque nightmare. Apart from there's even once you get past that, there's another question of, are the conditions fair? Do we agree with the philosophy and so on? But the other part of that, there's always going to be administrative glitches with anything that's conditional. And I've looked at the page. I'm going to just do a quick screen share, and we have here. Yep, it's paid to everyone without an adequate market income who is willing and able to contribute to Australian society. You know, and so that's all kinds of loaded stuff there. So. And they say up here that, you know, we'll stop. We won't get into a too deep a critique on this. Josh, what's the next thing? We might come back to these other alternative payments on another discussion. What's other news?
So other news is global basic income march happened. However, because we're all in isolation, it was a little bit sad. So I've just posted some pictures of a very sad where's Scott Tantans live? So wherever he is, they held a little thing, and they were basically all just standing in the mud, and there was about 10 people, it looked like. So I think in previous years, there's been really great marches. So it's just a shame. If anybody has some good pictures out of this basic income march, please send them through. But it didn't look great this year.
I think this is the bloke there with the hat who looks like a plague doctor, the black raincoat guy. I think that's Carl Wilderquist, who's a philosopher of basic income, who I really hope to get on this chat as a special guest sometime. Scott Santons would be nice as well, but I actually think Carl is even more interesting. So the people who are carrying the torch were there. Hopefully next year in Australia we'll get some participation as well. What's next? What's the next item?
So next is who is it? The Vice Chairman of the Security Council of United Russia Party has called for a basic income. And what is good there is that they're saying that the pandemic has shown how important it is to support people in order to maintain social stability, which is, I think, the correct message to take out of COVID.
Yeah. I think Russia is a really interesting case for a basic income because Russia has huge latent productive capacity. They can make everything in Russia. You know what I mean? I don't know how much of the factories might be a little rusty, but they've got a huge amount of technical knowledge. They've got what they don't have is money, right? So if you give people money and you stimulate local demand, I think you'd see Russia is a case where the idea of basic income is there's one of the ideas, lots of ideas, but one of the things is that there's latent productive capacity, that we could be more productive than we are, but there's not demand to stimulate that production. And I think Russia would be a place where that's especially true, even though it's true probably everywhere. What's the next one?
So next one is the group Mayors for a Guaranteed, Mayors for a Guaranteed Income. They're growing. They're working with Andrew Yang, and I saw that the mayor of Long Beach has proposed a trial in Long Beach. So that's looking good. When you look at that Twitter page, you see that they are growing, and there are more and more mayors who are joining the cause, which is really good.
Now, you didn't mention Canada. I've just remembered that there's been mumbling about the Liberal Party conference in Canada. There were people talking about a basic income as well. The hope was that Justin Trudeau would trot it out in his big sort of, I don't know, the Canadian State of the Union speech, whatever they do it, whatever that's called, some big annual speech that's given in Canada, but he didn't. And his speech was told by everyone to be, was a great speech. Pity there was nothing in it. And people had hoped for a basic income in that. Does anyone else have any basic? Was there another item, or is that the end of
one
the
more?
List? Sorry.
One more, and this I've left the best till last, maybe. So the UBI Lab is a group in the UK, which is kind of like our partner group. We've had a couple people from them talk with us, and they have just been followed by Ryan Reynolds on Twitter. And I checked, Ryan Reynolds also follows Scott Santanz and also follows Andrew Yang. So it's like Ryan Reynolds is one of us.
Yeah, well, I saw Scott Santanz on Instagram saying that Ryan Reynolds was following him on Twitter. So, you know, this is big news. Let's hope he starts to be vocal and not just an audience member, but an advocate for it. That'd be, you know, be bringing people in who haven't thought about this probably, which would be great. Okay, anyone else got any? Hello, Peter. Peter's just joined us. Peter's a long time at, you know.
Hey guys. Hey Josh. Hey Austin. Hey
so, who does anyone else have any?
Peter. Long time.
Mate, how are you?
Does anyone else have any basic income or basic income adjacent news that they'd like to add? No, yeah. I do know. So someone's got something. Loriana, go ahead.
Yes, I was just checking the name of the city. There is a city in England that 2 days ago, so they were having a council meeting but I just need to check. I don't think it's Leeds, because Leeds has already a trial approved. Sorry, I just have to check. Well, it's another city in England. So they had this 2 days deliberation and at council level, and the Social Democrats finally agreed. So at this point in time, there are 4 cities just in England. So besides Scotland that are gonna have their own trials, in England there are 4 cities that are gonna have a trial within the next 2 years of universal basic income. And there was also a very interesting book that was published in April. Unfortunately, it's still in German only, so it hasn't been translated into English. And it's an edited volume that looks specifically at the whole question of universal basic income and the ecological transition. So in terms of how to build a more ecologically sustainable society, because that's the elephant in the room that we cannot avoid talking about when we talk about universal basic income. And it's today the most comprehensive book. Apparently, I just read some reviews. I cannot read the book. I don't speak German, and looking forward for it to be translated.
That sounds fascinating, because that is, of course, one of the big, a lot of the people who might be for a basic income because they're quite progressive and forward-looking, one of their concerns is, obviously a basic income would increase consumption, and how do we manage the or offset the ecological impacts of that? But I just remembered as well, you mentioned the UK, the Liberal Democrats, as in the sort of centrist party, the party that's squished in the middle between Labour and the Tories in the UK. They've adopted a basic income as their policy. So that's a major win, I'd say as well. Now, okay, yes, we've got Michael. Please unmute and go ahead.
That's okay. One of the things that really interests me is the possibility of doing an actual universal trial. So all of the pilots seem to be constrained by area and time and the people, and inevitably people are going to behave differently in those circumstances than if they knew forever they're going to get it, and especially if it's not across the whole population. So one of the things that I would be really keen to explore is the opportunity to pay people, everybody starting small, say $10 per week per person. And so you just look at it and say, we don't know what the theory is, let's see what the practice is. After 3 months of everybody getting $10 a week, has the world blown up? Have we fallen apart? Or have in fact people felt a little bit easier? And then after that we make it $20 and so on, and we take 10 years to get to the poverty level, say $500 a week. But in the process, it'll also allows all of our businesses to adapt to the changing patterns of demand without creating shortages and major problems. And so, yeah, I'm wondering whether that's something that people are aware of being explored or whatever.
Look, I think that's an interesting idea. There's 2 things about that. One, whether we're ramping in the policy, whether we're trialing it or we're just doing a gradual introduction. My thought's always been that, yeah, you do this gradual introduction, but I think now, and the reason you do that is because you're worrying about the potential inflationary effects, for example.
Yes.
But now I think we're in a situation where the world's on the cusp of a deflationary spiral
Yes.
of collapsing demand. So it's almost like maybe you want to ramp it in
Well,
faster,
that's right.
be a little
Well,
bit more
but
aggressive.
that's where, yeah, and that's where I think you do it in practice. In other words, well, first of all, you've got to make sure you're capturing everybody, that there are people aren't defrauding the system, that the system works. So at $10 a person per week, you're not going to have major issues. But once you know it works, if you're finding it $10 and then 20 and 50 and 100, and you ramp it as quick as you can, because we don't know when inflation is going to kick in. And if it kicks in before we get to that poverty level, then we've got to make the decision, do we start to impose, GST or VAT type taxes to recirculate the money? And,
I think we're going to do it. I want to do a topic, perhaps one of the next discussion groups, what I want to call the monetary basic income as a monetary lever, the way that we use interest rates or fiscal spending generally to manage currency, and how does basic income fit into that big macro picture. So I'll make sure I'll make sure we get you back for that one. Now I'll just ask Josh and Michael Haynes. I think you've both left your hands up after Loriana, you've just put your hand up now, so you do want to speak. So let's make sure we try and put them up and then take them down so I don't get confused. Loriana, please go ahead.
Yeah, so in terms of the starting below basics, and as Michael, you were saying, $10 and everyone, and let's see what happens. So there are few problems. So from a political perspective, we always have to remember that politics go in cycles, like 3-4 years.
Yes.
And, it might lose momentum. That is one thing. So it starts then, and then it gets raised by the next government. But another good news that I forgot to say before, and it's partly related to that, is that on Friday, on the 25th, a European Citizen Initiative was launched to have a universal basic income introduced at European level. And the European Citizen Initiative, so it has to collect 1 million signatures from all of Europe. And they will have 1 year to collect. If they collect 1 million signatures, that it has to be discussed in the European Parliament as an option. And obviously what they are proposing is they do abide the definition of the basic income. So the basic is not defined. And what they are going for is probably something like what you were saying, like a more symbolic thing, even reunite Europe, which is falling apart.
I have seen some polling that shows majority support for UBI in Europe as well. So this is, maybe it's all closer than we think. Munley, you put your hand up. Munley, are you talking? Because you're still muted. I think he's maybe switched to another call. Hello, Munley? All right, let's move on to the actual article. I've got some special quotes from the article that I wanted us to. Munley's trying to unmute. Okay, I'm going to try.
Hey, can you guys hear me
there we
now?
go. Yes, we can.
Yeah, at the chat, I think the chat was interfering. But anyway, so I actually brought up a similar idea when I spoke at UBI Asia Pacific in Taiwan. Following on what Michael was saying, about universally, like, first of all, $10 a week is, I get what you're saying, but it seems like it would take too long to ramp up. So what I was thinking is the other, another approach would be geo arbitrage. So say you got a country like Australia that really needs to pay like $2,000 a month or whatever to achieve the same means, to achieve the same purchasing power of a basic income, say in Thailand, where it would cost $300. There's a big expat population here, actually. It's not even all Australians, it's like, British, American, whatever. So essentially, what if you had like a countrywide, like Anglosphere type thing, but instead of spending the $2,000 or whatever, like a month, you geo arbitrage that, and you test that in a place like here where it's a lot cheaper, or even maybe even places that are even cheaper than Thailand, that have like a combination of like all the essential infrastructure and needs, whatever, plus an educated population, to see if people actually are productive in some ways, other than so this. So I mean, like, I don't think you would need to do it countrywide to get it universal, but you would probably be able to do like a citywide scale thing, and that would be enough. And I think this is where like Western countries if you really think outside of the box, have an opportunity to arbitrage the welfare budget, like, and get the trial to be much more much more impactful, much larger numbers. If they kind of did it away from their own country.
We do that with other studies. So when they want to study the incentive effects of money, they conduct the studies in India. So they only have to, if they put the incentives, like I've seen studies on how does money affect performance in cognitively difficult tasks, for example. By the way, a large amount of money will actually make you perform worse if it's a cognitively difficult task, was the finding. It's a little counterintuitive thing. And what they did is they went to India to do that, because then every dollar they spend is a larger amount relative to the population. So it's a more effective way to do the research.
That's quite a good point. Actually, the difference there is that, like, okay, so if you do that, you also, like, however, you're testing for first world outcomes usually. Like, you want to see you want to see upward mobility and whatever. Most of the time, when you're testing in these impoverished places, people are barely buying like a bucket to catch the water from their leaky roof or whatever. Like, we have this weird situation where we have Thai farmers that can't get running water, but complain that literally asked me a 300 megabit internet is too slow. And I'm like, that's like basically like 30 times or 100 times faster than what Australia has, So of course.
Let's not get started on Australian internet. I'm tempted to wander off and start talking about the results of the Give Directly cash grants in the third world have been shown to be extremely effective. But we'll try and get to
let me wrap up here. Like, if you're really testing for the potential transformative version, like outcomes of basic income potentially, you basically need to do what I'm saying: get a combination of the arbitrage going and into the hands of the group of people that might actually use it for something better than other than just basic survival, or just to get themselves into a bullshit job. Right.
I think we should be just done with trials and just do it. We didn't trial.
No shit.
If you consider it a political right, which is what I do, then you don't need a trial to see should we give everybody the vote. You just do it.
Yeah, but
I'm almost sick. Every time I hear about a trial, I'm almost like, shut the up. Let's just do it already. Come on, guys. Now's the time. The world is falling apart around our ears.
Yeah, you're not an economist. But anyway,
anyhow, we won't start on the economists. All right, cool. Let's get to David Graeber, who is not an economist either, but I think had something very interesting to add to the conversation. I've got a bunch of quotes. We might not get to them all, but I'm going to start. These are from the article. I'm going to start with this one quote here. That is, in the year 1930, Maynard Keynes predicted that by century's end, technology would have sufficiently advanced that countries like Great Britain and the United States would have achieved a 15-hour work week. There's every reason to believe he was right. In technological terms, we're quite capable of this. Now, who thinks that's true? Does anybody have an opinion? Okay, we've got 2 hands going up, 3. Hold on a second. Let me put you back on. Let me stop screen share so I can see how many. I'm going to put everyone gallery view. Hands up if you think that's true. Okay, so we've got.
It's true, but incomplete. It's
okay,
true,
Charles.
in the sense that it's technologically true, but it doesn't take account of a whole lot of other factors that are not technology based. In fact, it's from a technological point of view, it's probably not even true anymore. It's probably much less than that now, from a technological point of view. But it's not technology is not the issue. It's the driver, but it's not the issue.
I agree. I think 2 things here. One, let's just assume that the technological side is correct. This also doesn't account for the fact that women are now in the workforce, right? So 15 hours becomes 7.5. We're talking about a 1 day a week working week. Now, I'm not sure that's actually the best thing to do is to make it so everybody has 1/5 of a full-time job.
That's the whole point, Austin. The whole point is there's a technological capacity. The question is, what's the human response to that technological capacity?
Well, that's the question Graeber's asking, and that's what we're trying to get at here. Is there anybody who wants to express outright skepticism just on the technology question? Because speak now, or we're going to race past it. Because if anyone just thinks no, okay. Munley, tell us what you think about the technology. What's wrong with that?
Well, because technology itself, like, I'm a big advocate of using technology to eliminate work, but it's actually human beings that decide and and ideate like what counts as work. So really, are we talking about work just to survive, work that is necessary, or work that is like expressive and advances humankind, and and so on? So fundamentally, I disagree with that, because we as human beings are generally conscious and alpha in our food chain. So we'll come up with stuff, but whether or not it meets that definition of work back then is the question. Because I would argue that we're gonna create work that we'll actually want to do, or whatever, like at some points in our lifetime. The difference between when that statement was written and now is that lifetime employment or lifetime work is really not necessarily like needed anymore, and arguably isn't really desirable. Like, I'm fine with J.K. Rowling writing Harry Potter once, and that's all she does the rest of her life, right? And then given the impact that's had, I'm perfectly fine that maybe she worked like 1 year and then that's it. But obviously she's got an empire now, and it takes a lot more work to maintain that empire. And just the point is, like, is it really necessary for people to just work from beginning of adult life to end? I would argue no.
I
It's just
agree.
like, what's the definition of that work now?
I think that's good. What I was getting at as well before is, rather than work 1 day a week, I would rather work 1 year in 5. I would rather work for 1 year full time, go to work.
Not true either. No.
Well, that's literally what I'm creating.
We've got to get language right here. David Graeber's article is called Bullshit Jobs, not Bullshit Work.
That's true. So we want to make the distinction between employment and other forms of labor, like self-directed
So what he's
labor.
talking about there is technology, our economic system, the way our economic system and our money system works is that people engage in activity called a job in exchange for money, which they then spend in the economy. That way of behaving has stopped being, is not required anymore. We don't need to operate that way anymore.
So you don't think we need any you don't think we need any jobs? You think all? I sort of tend towards this. I start to think basically almost all jobs are bullshit now. Work is a lie. We're living in a sort of sadistic ritual that doesn't actually have any material basis. It's just
no, that's not true. You need to distinguish between job and work. A job is one way of getting work done.
Okay.
A particular way of getting work done. There is no shortage of work to be done. J.K. Rowling is not going to sit around for the rest of her life doing nothing.
No, she's going to tweet, it seems, is what she's going to be doing.
She's going to do a whole lot of stuff. She might never have to earn $1 ever again. That's fine. I don't have a problem with that. But she's going to continue to work. We're all going to continue to work, or else we might as well give up.
Well, I mean, I think there's more than, so there's labor or work, and then that subset of that is employment, and then there's other stuff like child rearing, which some people would say that
child rearing is work.
Well, I mean, is that? But that to me is an interesting question. Is saying child rearing is work elevating child rearing, or is it lowering it? Is it saying
it's the reality?
Reflecting the fact that work if you're a physicist, work means expending energy. We've combined that, or we've subsumed that under the notion of jobs.
Yeah.
And we get consumed by jobs. That's why
but I mean, if you're calling, hold on, Charles, but if you're calling surfing work, I mean, like, then you're just using work to mean activity, right? If we're calling, so I think we want to have some different distinctions. Josh, do you want to jump in here?
The category that I like is that work is something that you do but you don't want to do, and play is something that you do want to do. So surfing expends work, but it is play. That's my definition.
Well, please go ahead. Michael.
I mean, one of the ways to think about it is that work results in an output that is consumed by somebody else, right? So even in the case of kids, it's consumed by kids, and play is something that you consume yourself. So basically, whether it's surfing or even if you're playing in a team sport, you're doing it for the returns that it gives you personally in the moment. There's no residual benefits to anybody else outside it, other than you might be doing it professionally, but then you're doing it as work and rather than play. And so that's a broad way how I sort of characterize it.
Now, look, I think I think these definitions are going to be a little bit slippery, and we kind of have to live with that and not worry too much about trying to pin them down. Just know what we mean in the moment and try and give each other the benefit of the doubt, and try and hope that. I think we're mostly going to be on the same page here. But I think one of the things Graeber does discuss, and I think this vibes with what Charles is saying, is that, you know, you might still have people doing necessary productive stuff. In fact, they might be doing stuff that's more necessary and more productive than it is now, than what they're doing now in the form of employment, and they might be doing it not for money. And I think that's a very valuable point. But Laureano, you've got something to add. Let's hear that.
Yes, I would like to take it back from the technology, because one thing that we didn't say clearly, even though implicitly was there, is that technology is a political decision. You know, how we design our technologies, for what purposes. And it's obviously a political decision. And it was in the chat, I think Stephen said that jobs are political. Why there is the job mantra? Why there is this all deservingness and undeservingness and stigmatizing of laziness? Because we need people to work, to get an income, to consume, to buy things, so that
somebody else can have a job.
Exactly. So that is the system. And that is the thing that I do not agree. I think we should change the language that we use, even within our discussion. If we keep on looped within, even describing work as something that we produce to consume, we remain ingrained within that same mentality that it's underlying the old job mantra. So we should expand work. And the point that was brought before about caring, for example, you know, our children upbringing, volunteer work, artwork. Well, is that so? As Michael, sorry, was saying, it's a very rational choice. So I'm doing it because I see some return on my action. Well, not that it's considered work is necessarily done for that. You know, there's sometimes in what we do as work, which is reproducing society and reproducing through culture, for example, and caring, it's not necessarily we are doing it for a return or a conscious return. So, and I think we need to break a bit with this language of production and consumption if we honestly want to expand and recognize what is work. What do we mean by work? Are we able as a society to recognize? Okay, you are caring for the plants in the public garden. You are a worthy part of this society. See,
but I would say even that is like, why, if we had a universal basic income, I wouldn't need society to recognize me. Or my need for social recognition would not be also tied to my survival. I could say everyone can, like, you know, the number one, like when I talk about a basic income in, let's say, a Reddit forum, but that's not a basic income forum, right? If I bring it up in another forum, people will always say that I am lazy. Well, you are lazy, so you want a basic income because you want to sit at home, while I, the hard working person, go out and work. And it's like, well, you would have the same basic income as me, and you would have a choice to make about that. But what I always want to say is, like, sure, I don't want to get into an argument with them where then I then have to say, no, you're wrong, I'm actually really hard working. I would say, yeah, sure, let's assume that you're right and I'm a piece of shit. And that all I want to do is stay home and, as Slavoj Žižek would say, watch pornography and drink lemonade. Why would, like, let's assume that that's the case. What's your best case? What do you want to do with me? Do you want me to starve? Let's assume that I'm this terrible lazy person. What is the way that society should deal with that terrible lazy person? Should we throw them in jail? Right? Should we let them starve outside the Woolworths, become an emaciated skeleton that our kids have to walk past? Like, it's just like, even if you would, so I just think this idea of recognition, so that we should be able to do stuff that if you want to water flowers, water the flowers. But the fact that this idea that the need for social recognition, that you see it in the job guarantee, it's like, okay, well, we're going to say child rearing is work. We're going to say volunteering is work. And that all seems to me to be making this assumption that that work is the highest form of human activity, and we have to elevate these other activities by calling them work. And it seems like we're already giving too much ground. I'm going to go on a really crazy tangent now. terrorism.
And
don't cut me off, Josh. Josh wants to cut me off, but he can't. When people talk about bombing Afghanistan or invading Iraq, they always say, well, that's terrorism, isn't it? And it's like, no, it's aggression, which is actually in international law a more serious crime than terrorism. But what we've accepted then is that a terrorist is the worst thing in the world, and that's an ideological position. So when we want to say that something's really bad, we say it's terrorism. You know, if we want to say that a school shooting or a massacre in the US is really bad, we say this is a form of terrorism. And it's like, but what that does is we've already placed terrorism as this category of the absolute worst thing that you can be as a terrorist, right? So therefore, if we want to say that a white supremacist is bad, we say that they're a terrorist, right? And on the other end, we've got this thing. So you've already by using that language, you've already accepted certain rules of the ideological game. And by trying to elevate all of these other activities, you know, taking care of your children, loving your children is just as good as being, you know, a corporate lawyer, apparently. Like we're elevating, we think we're elevating child rearing, or we think we're elevating taking care of our loved ones. We think we're elevating art or creativity by saying it's just as good as a real job. When I think that we've already failed if we say that. I think it's much loftier, it's much better than work for money to be doing these other creative, caring, giving things. But you know, I'm a philosophy student, so I always think of the tricky things. Loriana, go on. Sorry.
To this point, it's not the social recognition we are talking about. It's something that will survive. So if you implement a universal basic income tomorrow, so you are explicitly and by law, you're legislating that any form of human being or doing, it's acceptable. You know, whatever you do, you watch porn, you surf all day, whatever, you're gonna get this money. So it's like it's legislated, it's accepted on a more formal level, okay? Then the social recognition that happens, it's implicit, like how it's informed by the norms and values within society. So the universal basic income can keep on being and be paid to everyone, but there will be, as we are social beings, you know, we do define what we'll always have these categories of who is not worthy necessarily, but who is doing what in our society. And this is because we are social human beings. So, and this is why we should expand, and the recognition is not a legal recognition, because once you pay universal basic income, you're already legally recognizing that. But within us, within the culture and the cultural change that will take time. This is why I think using the language of recognition, it's important.
Okay, sure, I can accept that. There's levels to it. But social recognition wouldn't necessarily be about survival. But yeah, sorry, Loriana, were you?
Yeah, I will have to leave. So that
okay, well, we'll miss you. Okay, now we've got we can move on to the next. Goodbye, Loriana. Do we want to move on to the next quote, or does anyone have more to say about technology reducing working hours? Even though we've kind of drifted from that point. Okay, let's do the next quote. The next quote is, it's as if, the next quote I've got is, I might skip ahead a little bit because we want to get to cover a bit more ground. I was going to say, it's as if someone out there was making a pointless job just for the sake of us keeping working. And here precisely lies the mystery. In capitalism, this is precisely what is not supposed to happen. But let's skip past that to what is this quote here. David Graeber said he would not presume to tell someone who's convinced they're making a meaningful contribution to the world that really they are not. But what about those people who are convinced themselves that their jobs are meaningless? Huge swathes of people in North America in particular spend their entire lives working, performing tasks they secretly believe do not really need to be performed. It is a scar across our collective soul, yet virtually no one talks about it. Do people basically agree with that quote, or do they think he's overstating the problem? Josh, you agree? Michael? Tom? Yeah.
Yeah, I think I agree. I mean, I was living that example, you know, where you know, but it's not just me. I mean, you know, like arguably in a place like Thailand, you have a lot more freedom to quit your job because it costs a lot lower, right? So it doesn't, you know, you have a lot less to replace to be able to get out of your bullshit job, right?
that might be true for someone like you who has good access to the international market, but perhaps for an ordinary Thai person, it's not so true.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we had this discussion a lot. Like the richest Thai families, I would argue, benefited less from corruption and more just that they understood that you know, it was like once the first step was replace your job income, and after that to stay out of a job, and it's much easier to do. And they've just been able to compound and compound and compound their wealth, you know, for generations. Yeah.
Now I was kind of a little bit skeptical about this quote, but there is actually a survey that was done after his article went viral and crashed the website that it was on. The British government did a survey where they asked people, do you believe your job is socially meaningful? And 37% of the British public said no, they did not believe that their job, 30 of the respondents said that they had a job did not think was meaningful. It was a MyGov's poll. Yes, Josh?
In his book, this is what the majority of his book is about. It's talking about people who've messaged him after this article and have talked about their particular situations. So, and polls and things like that. So just by the way.
So here's the thing as well, right? They probably, and he talks about this to an extent, that there's the people who are doing directly bullshit jobs, right? So you're you know, telemarketing encyclopedias or whatever, right? And then there's the people, then there's the childcare worker who's taking care of your kids while you're at work. Then there's the person who's building the office in which that company that does bullshit business is based. Then there's the fact that you're on the road means that someone's going to expand so to me, if you so much of work, a lot of the work that happens is actually providing services to other businesses and providing services to other people with jobs. So if you remove that 37% of the labor, maybe there's another 10% or 20%, or we don't know how big, that goes away as well immediately. So right now we're seeing it with, you know, there's Barangaroo, I heard the other day, you know, or these are big towers in Sydney, have the office towers have, you know, like 5%, 10% occupancy rates, and 30-40% of people are saying they're going to work from home. So now what about all the construction work that was going to happen? What about all the people in selling coffees at the bottom of the buildings? Those are sort of, this is where I don't think it's about, I think the whole economy has a little bit of bullshit in it. Every job has the whole economy has a lot of bullshit in it, and each job has at least some. So even healthcare, for example, what if you're just taking care of people who have been working, you know, someone's having a heart attack because they have an unhealthy lifestyle, sitting at a desk 10 hours a day, eating unhealthy food and not exercising because they're so busy, you know, filing nuisance patent, being a patent troll to, you know, for a living. And then that's putting a burden on the healthcare system, which, you know, so that's sort of valuable work that is a cost of bullshit work. So I think this is pretty uncontroversial. We don't seem to have many people disagreeing with this. So we move on to the next quote.
You're looking for drama. You're looking for
drama gets the ratings, guys. Come on, someone yell at me, call me an idiot. No, please don't. I'm going to share my screen again, and we're going to look at this next quote. Professional, managerial, and clerical sales and service workers tripled, growing from 1/4 to 3/4 of total employment. In other words, productive jobs have, just as predicted, been largely automated away. Even if you count industrial workers, including the toiling masses in China and India, such workers is nowhere near as large a percentage of the world population as they used to be. Now, really, the interesting part here is the managerial, clerical, sales, and service workers tripled from 1/4 to 3/4. This is, I think, over the period since Keynes was talking. Now, what strikes me is that actually, I don't know, it seems odd to me, but that should almost be the part of the economy that's easiest for computers to take over. If it's just about you know, managing information, shouldn't computers have actually automated that faster than they automated, you know, watering gardens or doing physical labor, since computers are primarily information tools? Josh, do you have thoughts on this? I know this is your field. Josh worked in automation. Or? maybe come to Tom after that.
Go to one of the other automation people. I just noticed something while you were talking. So
Okay.
Yeah, I actually automated away 10 jobs before I left Australia, and they were like little kids type jobs, like data entry clerk, like Excel type stuff. It was all done through macros. So here's the thing, like if it's really there's no variation in the job, like holding a road sign, or essentially the algorithm that the job doesn't change. That's fine. Utility based work is I like to call it. The thing is, all of this like professional, clerical, whatever work, it's not that cut and dry, because some of it requires some level of human interpretation, but the other side that you really can't automate away is human interaction. So as cool as computers are, they have no life experience. Like a computer can't actually go and walk over to something unless you give them a robot body and like tap somebody in the shoulder or something, or I have a human conversation to go extract something that out of that human that they could have only experienced in person and so on. So that's actually why it's much harder to automate these things away. I mean, like chatbots have been around for a while, and still, there's like human expression in terms of slang, and a lot of it comes from just lived experience. So that's why we have so a lot of this, like the back office stuff, BPO, it has been and a continuously like I guess automated, but the last mile of automation, this is really where I want basic income to come in, because we essentially can automate the stuff, but we essentially need people to be in the mindset of training the machines to eliminate, if not obliterate, the entire job sector. Because once you do it once, you can just sort of cut and paste it like you're at that sector. So I mean, like, this is what I wanted to bring up earlier. It seems like realistically we can only really get like redefinition, reclassification of work, in the government for labor market and all that stuff. So why don't we just change the definition of acceptable work to also be my most passionate area, which would be complete outright obliteration of as much work, as much structural unemployment as I can possibly cause. Like, as AI engineers should be rating themselves not on users or signups, all the other stuff that in app installs that software engineers rate themselves on. They should be rated on how many jobs did you kill. I want to personally be responsible for destroying at least 1% of GDP, or causing at least 1% of unemployment in any given country at least once. And then 1% is a starting point.
It sounds a little bit like you're trying to match the caricature of the AI, of the tech bro UBI advocate who wants to destroy jobs. And we've got other people raising their hands, but I think this is what Arthur C. Clarke said. The full goal is full unemployment, right? Rather than full employment, the goal should be full unemployment.
Yeah, I mean, I say that is my most quoted thing.
Yeah. So people, the job guarantee advocates, someone like Stephanie Kelton, they used to say, and workfare advocates used to say, we need to turn the unemployment office into the employment office. And I think what want to say is we want to have a whole new thing called the unemployment office, and it's really the unemployment office, as in it's the office that's meant to drive, the unemployment of the masses. Now, I think that's a little bit of an extremist position. I think, but one of the other things you were saying is that it seems to be emotional labor that seems to be the thing that can't be automated. And I was actually having a discussion with the museum curator just last night, and he was talking about, so he works in user experience in art galleries, and what he was saying was that when he'd come in to this last place, all of the customer interactions with people all the staff were interacting with people across a counter, taking money and giving out tickets. And he said, well, we can have a machine do that, and then we can put this person in front of the counter over with the art, talking about the art and interacting with the people in a way that a machine can't do. Let's use them in a way that actually enriches the experience. Since they're there to do emotional labor, let's let them do emotional labor. Like you hear the story of the old lady would take her check to the bank and then talk to the teller for 25 minutes, right? It's like, well, we can automate, so we can, and everyone else just wants to get across and bank their money or whatever, just do their transaction. Well, we can make the transactions automated and then pay someone to talk to the old lady. If we're doing emotional labor, let's do emotional labor. But Tom, I think you were first to have your hand up, and then we'll go Michael and then Stephen.
Yeah, I don't have any strong arguments with Munley, but the aspects of jobs, roles, work in management and sales are all psychological, but they're also about human judgment. And if that's automated, what you lose is the quality of judgment on top of those roles. And in a marketplace, that's why a customer prefers to be a long-term customer of the well-serving business. That's sort of all I wanted to say on that. I could talk about AI, but we're going to run out of time.
Well, we'll do a whole topic on AI, and we'll get
Okay,
you back
now
to that one as well.
I've been working in AI as well since about 1985, so I can tell a few stories at some point.
We should definitely do that. We'll definitely have a topic on AI as part of the basic income discussion group. It's a very obviously a relevant topic, AI and automation, and where the difference between those two and so on. Let's go to Michael Haynes. What did you put your hand up for?
Yeah, just in terms of automation and everything, I think Munley and others have made the point. There really isn't any end to work. Human beings are going to keep on inventing it. And if we think about paying people a basic income, we're recognizing that money is an essential tool in our economy. And therefore, what role should money play in the economy as we automate more and more jobs away? And my sense is that it really won't change. Effectively, money we use to measure the value of the contribution that you and I and everybody else makes to creating stuff. And we get the money as a record of that value, and that allows us to take back out of the rest of the community the similar sort of value as we contributed. So we put in, we get our money to record how much we put in, and then we spend it and consume what we take out. And that sort of role will continue on, as far as I can see, well into the future, because it enables us to avoid the whole barter thing of trying to then determine how much you've put in and how much you get out. It's a very convenient tool for us to measure. And my sense is that automation is not going to do away with that sort of work money relationship. So I'm not sure whether that's exactly on topic, but it's yeah.
I think it is. I think it is on topic, and I think it's quite contrary to what a lot of us have been saying. I think that we will probably have a, like in the next 200 years or 100 years or something, we probably won't ever see the complete end of it. And that was something that one thinker I like to quote called Alex Howlett says is, labor is also the labor market should be how we get people to do things that they wouldn't otherwise do. And I think that's there's something to that. And so in general, I think what money does a lot of the time is mobilize resources, whether it's labor or oil or whatever it is, mobilize resources that wouldn't self-mobilize. And so to some extent things may self-mobilize, and it might be that everybody loves gardening so much, and we have such great technology and such, great GM soybeans that we can all just grow enough food in our own gardens, and we actually don't. Turns out food's outside the monetary economy. We can imagine that world, right?
I can imagine that at some point, but at that point you won't have a basic income, because while ever we are paying people money, they are spending it. And then the businesses that they are spending it on are employing and using resources, which they then have to pay. And then there will be people who will be working in those businesses who will be looking to be paid over and above their basic income, because that's one of the reasons that they would work, is that they can say, well, instead of me just sitting around doing my own stuff, I'll actually earn some more money so that I can have an even higher standard of living when I in my free time. And so I think if we get to the stage where things just appear, like the Garden of Eden, the fruit grows on the trees and you walk along the road and you pick the fruit off the tree, I can see that technologically that will happen, maybe even in the next 100 years. The Garden of Eden will become a technical Garden of Eden and things will just appear to meet our needs. But until that time comes, we need a UBI, and while we have a UBI, we'll still have that sort of money-work relationship. But
let's go to Stephen and see what have you got to add?
Yeah, I was going to say, like, Graeber talks about managerial feudalism to explain the group of people who took all the productivity gains from post 1970s onwards. So they created all these bullshit jobs, and they don't work in the classical capitalist sense. They're just imposed on the real kind of economy which is underneath it. And so you have all these executives and consultants and lobbyists, and it was explicitly done just to hoover up all the wealth. And it's just amazing that, you know, this didn't become a social problem. Like, that's what Graeber, he keeps talking in the book. He's like, why isn't this more of a problem? Why aren't people, you know, protesting or doing something about this? It's, yeah.
Well, I mean, this might be a good way to get to another quote. But Peter, you wanted to add something before we do that?
Oh no, yeah, it was just I think back on the whole money thing. It's just an allocation of resources in the economy. So yeah, you're right, Michael. While we still have that scarcity, when not everyone can get everything that they want, there is that allocation of resources, which is denoted by money. The thing is, the value currently is being captured by, you know, the Microsofts, the Amazons. You know, what I do in my day job is automating away work with these Microsoft licenses, you know, whether it's Power Automate or Power Apps and, you know, all the sort of robotic process stuff. That's essentially replacing the income that's being attributed to the jobs of those employees to then replace it with the license cost that Microsoft is capturing. Well, we get a clip as well while doing that. So, you know, the Microsofts and the Amazons are essentially accumulating more and more of that value in the economy. So it goes towards the share price of that company, so the share capital. And as such, it's really accumulated towards the shareholders of that company. And that's why if we don't implement a UBI, more and more of that value will accumulate into these small and small players. And then there'll be civil unrest because, yeah, the inequality will just drive that dystopia. So yeah, I think UBI is inevitable. It's how we want to make that transition in a less violent way. So that's the sort of how we can take that value away and distribute that equally and more equally to prevent that inequality from happening.
I mentioned earlier Alex Howlett, who's founder of something called CMT, which is Consumer Monetary Theory. So that's modern monetary theory, but without the job guarantee, more or less, with a UBI instead of a job guarantee. So I think it's sort of it's an improvement. But he got into this whole thing because of the issue of intellectual property and program. He was a programmer, and he saw the sort of dynamic that you were talking about. He was like, we could, you know, the problem is that intellectual property is sort of all the money is going to intellectual property, and he could, for example, you could give away software and not patent it. You could do it all open source, but then there wouldn't be any jobs for programmers. And so it was like, well, that's how he got into the idea of a universal basic income, because if programmers could all just, and I know programmers who are like this, who are, you know, plenty of programmers working at big tech who are basically in their hearts communists, right? Or anarchists who don't really want to have a job, they would just write code all day anyhow, because of the sort of inherent appeal of doing that work. And they love solving the technical problems. You know, on their weekends, they go home and they work on other tech projects that don't pay them any money, right? And probably if they didn't have to do the jobs, the tech projects that they do would be even better. But intellectual property ends up being this necessary way of capturing some money so that they can, for the company, so the company can employ them. And, you know, the snake is sort of eating its tail a little bit. So now look, I'm going to, but I also think what you're talking about is the dropping share of wages as a share of income in the economy, which is relevant to what Michael and I were talking about before, the monetary idea. A UBI is a monetary tool, looking at these big macroeconomic pictures, and the work of a guy called Jeff Crocker, who we might get on, he's actually shown that spending has overtaken wages since the 70s. So used to be that the total wage bill of the economy was greater than the total consumer spend. Now the total consumer spend is greater than the total wage bill. So that means that unearned non-wage income is already filling that gap, and that's two things. It's either passive income, like shareholders getting it, or credit cards. and loans, right? And both of those things have, there's a sort of a moral turpitude to both of those things, taking up a bigger and bigger share of the economy. But he says, rather than trying to push all the money back out through wages, we use a basic income. Now, I'm going to go to another quote, which is probably jumps off more closely from what Stephen was saying at the beginning. But this is, I think it is relevant to a lot of what we've been saying. And it is he said that the mystery is, how do these jobs get created, right? Capitalism is meant to eradicate jobs. Everyone wants to lower their labor costs and do things efficiently. So what's the how do we solve this mystery of where these jobs are coming from? And he says, the answer clearly isn't economic. It's moral and political. The ruling class has figured out that a happy and productive population with free time on their hands is a mortal danger. Think of what started to happen and this even began to be approximated in the 60s. And on the other hand, the feeling that work is a moral virtue, a value in itself, and that anyone not willing to submit themselves to some kind of intense work discipline for most of their waking hours deserves nothing, is extraordinarily convenient to them. Now, who wants to respond to this? There's kind of two parts. I'm going to break it into two parts. So should we respond to the first part first? Surely someone's got an opinion on this. Josh, go ahead.
I think that you can't have a democracy without a basic income. If people don't have the time to participate in democracy, then it can't be a democracy. And we've got a lot of people who are busy all the time and don't have time to stay up to date with news and get engaged. And yeah, that's my thought.
I actually, I've once thought we could frame a basic income, call it the voting wage. Right, it's the wage you get for doing your job and being a part of a democracy and voting, and then I don't know, you don't actually have to vote, but you have to show up, right, or whatever to get it. But there's danger with that, but I think that's a similar idea. I got the idea because there was some right winger on Facebook posted a meme that said there's those who work for a living and those who vote for a living, and I figured, well, if that's the thing that they hate, vote for a living. You've got yourself an idea there, guys, and so that being what you're being paid for is, this ties in with Carl Widerquist, says about, basic income as a sort of political right, that you get it for respecting the property system and for respecting the laws. So I'm not going out and chopping down trees in the national park and building myself a little hut because that's not my property. So I've submitted to this property system, and that sort of robbed me of a livelihood in one sense. It's robbed me of the right to take my sustenance directly from nature. So what's my compensation for that? And so this idea of basic income as a political right, I think, is quite good. And this is what Graeber is saying, is that they're keeping us busy with work so that we don't, so that we don't change society and we don't have a revolution. And I think there's something to that. I think the basic income has huge radical potential once you free people up. Michael.
Yes, I mean, one of the crazy things though is that what happens to the money that's paid as a basic income is it flows straight up to the rich. So it flows up much, much faster than it ever trickles down, because once it gets to the rich in terms of profits and senior executive salaries, the money gets taken out of the real economy and it gets invested into the financial economy and boosts up, asset prices and so on. And it never, hardly ever goes back down once it's there, because the rich don't liquidate assets to buy more assets or to spend their lifestyle. They'll spend that out of a proportion of their income. But once their income goes out of the real economy, it's gone. And so the really strange thing is, the more money that the community has in its hands, the richer the rich will become. And we shouldn't worry about that, so long as everybody, they're not using their power politically, right? So we have to get their money out of the political process. And Andrew Yang has talked about having, the democracy dollars and things like that. So to your point, Austin, if people are then fully engaged in the political process, then you let the other side of the equation go, and it is what it is, so long as the government is looking after the commons, making sure that, business is not destroying our common good, and that frauds are not being perpetrated.
Or we can tax them like crazy, right? So that the
We
money
don't need
flows.
to.
Well,
Yeah,
I mean,
it
if
can
we
flow
want to-
around. It doesn't need to tax them like crazy. It just needs to be taxed enough that it keeps going round and round and round. And
that's the idea.
Yes,
So you can imagine the economy a bit like an electrical circuit, right? So
Yeah.
you want to put money in like a positive charge somewhere, and you need
Absolutely.
a negative charge somewhere so that it flows out, and as it goes, it turns the machine.
Yep.
Right?
Absolutely right.
And so whether it's flowing out at the moment, but at the moment, what we mostly do is we put the money in at the top, and then it gets sucked. So it all stays in the financial system. So what have they done in the US since the pandemic started? They printed $4 trillion or something and thrown it at the financial sector. And the hope that one of those people will invest in a company that employs people, which automation makes less and less likely. But let's assume that there is a basic income and that the money then flows up to the Jeff Bezos of the world. In a world with a basic income, his investment patterns are also going to be different. He's going to invest in stuff, in actual consumer goods. So at the moment, Apple makes actual stuff, right? But when they get a tax break or they get cheap money from the Fed, you know what they do? They buy Apple stock. They do stock buybacks and they jack up their own asset prices because they don't believe that there's anyone out there who's going to buy another device that they could make, right? They don't think that there's a consumer market. The most profitable thing for them to do is this company which makes real stuff, right? And then there's other sectors of the economy which are purely business services or just financial sector sort of shell games, right? And what they believe is that the best return they're going to get is to stay within the financial sector because the only people with money are other people in the financial sector, right? Whereas if consumers had money, their behavior would be different. So yeah, they might get all the money, but consumers would get stuff.
Absolutely, yeah.
Right? We would get the products and goods and services, and that's what they would be making money for. And I think it's also probably my personal opinion is that equality is just a primary good, that a more equal society is better than a less equal society. And I don't need to justify that. That's just, equality is good. Like the sun is hot, right? It's just a self-evident truth to me, right? Like all men are created equal or whatever, or all people. And so I would say that then you tax people at the top quite heavily, and what they get is the prestige of success and some increased spending power, but they don't get to amass these Bezos scale ridiculous fortunes that some people do. Does anyone else have anything to add on this idea of, because what this quote is saying, I'll just share this quote again. It's saying it's almost, he says later on that he's not saying that it's a plan. He says it's trial and error, but here it almost sounds like it's a plan. It's a conspiracy theory, that the rich have come up with all these basic jobs. They're all saying you employ them doing this and you employ them doing that, and we'll all take a hit in our labor costs. We'll all spend a bit more money than we want to, just so we keep everybody busy with bullshit jobs and prevent a revolution.
No,
And I don't think that's the case, but I do think this part. On the other hand, the feeling that work is a moral value in and of itself, and this idea of the Protestant work ethic, that is definitely true, and that's a major factor in where these bullshit jobs come from. But that goes back through the monetary system, because the way we get money to people in the real world is through, we tell banks to lend to companies so they will hire workers, then the workers will get wages. And that's the main way the government tries to get money to people to fund the consumer economy. So supply precedes demand in the way that we're doing it. And that's,
and also though, housing loans and car loans and consumer loans and all of the money that you were talking about before, Austin, on credit cards and everything, people are actually replacing debt with income, and therefore they're building up this huge debt. And while the interest rates are really low, this whole thing now of the banks just being given free rein to no longer have to be concerned about the borrower, it's all the responsibility of the borrower now. We're just completely re-establishing all of the bad behaviours that are going to take us to the next collapse, because there's no incentive for a bank to not lend, because they know behind them is the government sitting to catch the ball at the very end. And at the front, if people take out loans, they're going to be paying high interest, or they're going to be paying interest and upfront costs and all that sort of stuff. They'll get their bonuses, and if it all goes bad down the track, too bad,
Yeah, so there used to be an expression. You owe the bank $1 million, you're in trouble. Owe the bank $1 billion, the bank's in trouble. Now I think it's if you owe the bank $1 billion, the government's in trouble.
That's right.
The banks have dodged, get it both ways, right? There's the too big to fail phenomenon.
Yeah.
Stephen.
I think pertaining to the moral value, can you be a good adult citizen without a job? It's that simple. Can you be a good citizen, like a good adult, a respectable, if you don't have a job?
Well, see, I mean, my immediate desire is to say, well, what about raising kids or something like that? And to see, that's something that our society
yes or no. If you don't have a job, are you a good adult?
Yes, absolutely. Okay, human life is actually human life, human experience is really the foundation of why I back UBI, right? Like our life is finite. Okay, even if we spend our life drinking wine, like fucking or whatever else, right? It's human life, it's human experience. Okay, why should we waste this, in jobs doing something that is a waste of our finite time on the planet? Really, that's the foundation behind behind my job elimination, tendencies and everything else.
I agree. I think when I say equality is a good, I think freedom is also a good, and freedom from the need to work is a kind of freedom, and work done without the gun of poverty to your head is more noble than work done because otherwise you'll get kicked out on the street.
Yeah, but that's not how it works, is it? Like if you're unemployed, what's your situation? Do people look up to you?
No, they don't. Josh.
Is the question, is that the way we want things to be, or is that the question, sorry, is the question the way things currently are? I'm confused about what you're saying, Stephen.
Yeah, I was just saying, what's your initial emotional, I know you want to support UBI and, all people are good, but what's your initial kind of gut reaction? An adult
gut reaction is yes, everybody has value.
They're a good
it doesn't matter if you're working or not.
I think probably unemployed people are better than employed people, actually, is my gut reaction, is that the people who don't fit into the institutional mold are probably actually have a stronger sense of morals and a more distinct and interesting personality. And that's why, this is sort of self-defense here. That's why they don't, because jobs actually require you to be stupid, and jobs actually require you to be a conformist, and jobs require you to kiss the boss's ass and make the boss feel smart even when the boss is an idiot. And that, I was working once at a call center. This is another charity job, so not the worst thing. And I was being trained, doing the training session, and they said the script that we were learning was just a donation of just $100 could give meals for 1,000 children. And I said, so is that one meal each for 1,000 children, or is it multiple meals for 1,000 children? Because clearly, because the phrase was ambiguous, and I was just wanting clarity on what I was actually selling. Boom, fired, right? And George Orwell talks about it in 1984. He talks about one of his, Winston Smith, the main character, as a co-worker who's really dedicated to the party and loves the party and is working about it. But he talks. He says, he goes, "You see too clearly, you think too clearly, and you speak too plainly. So we know that you're going to go." And so all institutions have an element of Orwellianism to them. You've got to sort of, you've got to not just show up. You've got to act like you love being there. There's an element of dishonesty required to be part of a big institution. So, and the bigger the institution, the more perverse that becomes. Where it's not just enough to show up and do your job. You've got to act like you love it, which is being dishonest. So I actually think probably unemployed people are slightly better on average than employed people. But then again,
Austin, could I just throw something in there? Of course, there's probably 50% of the population at any time are outside employment, so that they're all our young, the elderly, the disabled, they're unpaid carers, and a proportion of people who are between jobs. and that group just circles around. It's not a constant group of people. And in fact, as you probably know, even with the unemployed, most people are re-employed again. And so, and sometimes multiple times. And my feeling is that we need to maybe respect both sides of the coin, because in fact, as a human being, we are in that, on all those groups at various times in our lives. We're in the group that is not in a paid job, the 50% not in a paid job, and other times we're in the 50% that is in some sort of a paid job. And the paid jobs at the moment are the places where most of the bullshit jobs are. In the unpaid area, there aren't too many bullshit jobs, because people are choosing what they're going to do in that 50%, right? But in the other 50%, that's where our bullshits are. But there's also a huge amount of valuable work, because it's where all of the stuff that we actually require does get produced in the main. Whereas on the in the unpaid area, it's often services and caring and a little bit of production, but not so much.
I would say two things about that. One is that it's probably even more extreme than you think. I saw a statistic that I'm trying to remember. It's not labor force participation. It's another statistic. It was the percentage of working age people without a disability who are currently in employment, or maybe just the working age people who are currently in employment. And in the US, at the lowest point during the pandemic, job losses, it got down to 52%. So that's just working age. That's not even counting retirees. That's not even counting children or disabled people or whatever. I'm not sure about disabled people. I can't remember the stat. But so that was already down to 52% of people who are. So this idea that work is normal and not working is abnormal is also a little bit of an illusion already. Right? It's not that abnormal to not be working. It's kind of a myth. And this is something else I want to say, Stephen, when you were saying what do people in general think? So about whether a person who has a job is moral or not, right? So Zizek has this idea called virtual beliefs. So a virtual belief is an idea that no one actually holds, but everybody believes that everybody else holds, right? So no one wants to say, actually, I think this is the Soviet Union was the classic example. No one wanted to say Stalin's a piece of shit. Everyone says I love Stalin, right? Because everyone else is saying it, you think everybody else is everyone else believes it, and so everyone's going around not believing it, pretending to believe it. And there's no real believers. There's just this mutual universal pretense. It's like the classic children's story, the emperor's got no clothes. Everyone thinks that because what the idea is that only moral people and good people can see the emperor's clothes, right? So the emperor's actually naked, but everybody says they can see it because they don't want to be the bad guy, right? They don't want to admit that they can't see it. Yeah, exactly. And we live in a deeply ideological society. It's not post-ideological, is my belief. And that ideology shapes and enforces not just what people believe, and then on top of that, what people express. It's there's a line, I forget. I think it was some TV show. The queen is talking to a prince to decide if she wants to marry him. Oh, we lost Tom. And he says, don't you even ever say what you really think? And he says, I don't even think what I really think. Oh, Tom's back. That's great. So sorry, I've forgotten. Stephen, you've still got your hand up. Michael, you've still got your hand up. Munley, I think you've put your hand up. You wanted to speak?
Yeah, I was gonna say, this is a false binary between employed and unemployed, because we have a lot more other roles we have just as human beings in society: friend, advisor, confidant, support. Senior citizens have the benefit of being able to tell the young guys, hey, people have always been this stupid, forever, right? Often, that's needed. It is really underrated.
Can you buy a house with it, though?
Huh?
Can you buy a house with all those?
Here's the thing: you could make a really bad business decision thinking that somebody is, I don't know, depending on circumstances, stupid or not stupid, depending on how it plays. And the money you can save from avoiding that bad situation, talking to someone older who has been around the block, might save you enough money to buy a house. So I would say like, yeah, potentially, but just it's a false, we have a lot of things in this life, parents, or babysitter or just whatever. We have a lot of roles throughout this life besides just, like employed or unemployed, for God's sakes. And like, in my opinion, I don't really think about that moral or, is someone a bum or not. I don't think about this at all. I look at the whole picture. Like, what's this person? Is this person generally useless, or is this person just like, is this person valuable, but this doesn't have a job right now? That's actually sort of the benefit. Like how I've done my startup at the moment is, really emphasizing like, building a gaming community for people who are also generally skilled or smart and have some other, talent or skill outside of gaming. So what we try to tell people is, this isn't LinkedIn. Don't fill out a resume. This isn't a job site. Just sort of mention your skills, or break it down to very simply, how would your friends describe you? This is my mate, Josh. He is good at writing papers about UBI or something. He's really passionate about UBI. Talk to him about UBI. That's it. Just look at him and just, a broad overall picture. Maybe there could be a simple summary, but is this person basically useless, deadbeat, or evil, or likely to harm someone, or are they just, you could just swim, you could just surf, you could just do one thing, and I could just say to my friend, hey, this guy's into surfing, he might be a good surfing buddy. For God's sake, I think for me that's enough.
I think it's really interesting. I think it's really interesting though to push it always push it to the extreme. And so let's imagine that like someone is just a deadbeat. So what do we as a society want to do about that? Right? Like my bet would be that if someone has no activity that they want to engage in, they're actually suffering from some kind of profound depression. And they probably need support. If all they want to do is just passively consume TV, right? Then or just sit on the couch staring into space. Well, maybe they're meditating. Maybe they're thinking deep, profound thoughts that are going to change the world. When in 5 years' time, after they've finished their contemplation, they open their mouth. But let's say they're not. Let's say that somebody is actually just sitting there thinking hateful thoughts about how they wish everyone else would suffer, right? Still, what are we going to do as a society with that person? What's our plan?
Yeah, so it's the whole libertarianism thing, right? Like, everything is okay unless it harms people. But generally, like, I'm pretty optimistic about these people that are doing nothing, because I ultimately have found that in most cases, people haven't found their thing yet, right? Or they're still exploring the world, and it's more important to give them the freedom to explore, to find the thing where they just naturally get up and do something. Because really, what seems to be the case is that it's actually the jobs, the bullshit jobs, or the career that they never chose, or the career that their parents impose on them, that actually keeps them from finding their thing. I mean, for you, Austin, it's probably hosting podcasts and media, or whatever, and you've probably strategically kept out of bullshit jobs enough to maybe get this far. I don't know. But I wouldn't say you're useless. You're at least doing this. Something.
Oh, I don't think I'm useless. I think I'm incredibly important. But that's
even like, there may not be any money here, but there's reinforcement there in that. Oh, okay, so Austin put this thing on, and there's these 10 other losers that had nothing else better than to show up.
This is relevant. Yeah. I think I used to try and make a living from journalism. So I was a philosophy grad, and I was in Lebanon, and a war broke out while I was there, and I started blogging just because I thought it was an important and good thing to do, to bear witness to the suffering of the people who were there. And then I got picked up and it got published in a newspaper, and that gave me the idea that I could make money out of doing it. And then I spent 10 years chasing a career in journalism, and I did some work that I'm proud of, and then other work that I'm less proud of. And the correlation.
That's the flip side of it. Yeah.
The correlation between the work that I got paid that I got paid best for, and the work that I'm most proud for is not good.
Yeah, because that's the thing. Like, that's the thing. Like, I like to tell young people, like, to do as many shitty jobs as possible in like every possible industry that they're potentially interested in, right? Because just because you were able to get paid for this doesn't mean that it's necessarily the best application of your time to get paid, right? It just so happened that you really chased this thing for 10 years, and maybe you should have explored the other thing. I don't know. But at the end of the day, like, I'm just talking about just this event. Like, someone might be thinking they're the only person on the planet or in Australia that cares about UBI, and then like, maybe they don't have anyone else to talk to, and then they look at this thing, and then they feel more more apt to voice their support for it, because oh hey, this is actually a community. There's people talking about this, and and whatever. I mean, like this little things like this, build up. Great things from small beginnings. I think it was somebody, right? Somebody
From
said
little
that.
things,
Yeah.
big things grow. It was a Paul Kelly song about the wave hill.
Yeah, it's there's a Latin saying. I think it was Sir Francis Drake who said that. Hopefully I had that right. But anyway, probably
All
for
right,
somebody else.
So Austin, can I speak? Or
Please go ahead,
Yeah.
Michael.
I was just going to say, one of the biggest bullshit jobs is actually the job of being unemployed, right? And going through all the bloody hoops to get the money, and then to find that, okay, if I take some extra work, that's going to reduce my benefit, and then I got to weigh up the cost of doing that, and then having to re-employ and reapply for the money and all that sort of stuff. And especially if I rationally become, quotes, disabled because I'm 55 and I've got no hope of getting another job, and now I have to actually sit around on my bum and I can't do anything at all, because if I seem to be doing anything, I'll lose my benefit. And so we're actually creating unemployed bullshit jobs.
You can't go coach a kid's footy team or be that mentor figure or do something that might be productive, because then you'll get busted for not being sick enough and you'll get kicked off your payment.
Or that's right, or even just doing some part-time work that you physically might be able to do for a few hours a day or whatever. Can't do any of that. Can't do work around your house, doing repairs and lifting stuff, because, well, if you're not sitting on your bum, you'll end up losing your benefit.
Yeah, and just the paperwork.
Okay, so
and the paperwork.
$300,000 a year bullshit job, would you take it?
Sorry, what was
If
that?
I offered you a $300,000 a year bullshit job, would you take it?
I'm in the fortunate position in life, Stephen, that I don't have to, and I wouldn't.
Knock it back.
I'd knock it back, yeah. I'm
Yeah,
71.
I would take it. I would take it for a couple of months, and then I would just quit.
Yeah.
Really?
Well, I mean, I have in my life, to be fair, 10 years ago, I probably did have a job just like that for about 18 months. But
Careful, remember this is public.
Yeah, well, that's all right.
They can't get you now.
No. Yeah, that was a while ago.
How about $500,000 a year?
What?
$500,000.
$500,000. Well, again, no, because I'm 71, right? So I've reached the
700.
No, there's no amount of additional money that would interest me in doing anything other than I'm doing now, because I'm still engaged in all sorts of interesting projects around 3D computer modeling of cities, and engaged with you guys and others about UBI and reforming tax and reforming the banking system. I have such a full life. There's no way I want to work for anybody else. No amount of money.
I would take it, but I'd actually secretly be doing the job that I'm already doing, which is running my own startup, which is building a product that I care about and I think is useful. And I would then be funneling. I would live on 50,000 of it, and I would funnel $250,000 of that money into this other company, which I would then hope could take off, and that would be my goal. I would be that's also that's how they get you, isn't it? Right? That's the trap, is that you believe by acquiring that money, you'll get freedom and you'll be able to achieve your other goals. But then you don't have the even more valuable thing, the only thing which once lost cannot be regained, and that's time. So
yeah, exactly. We'd be in the same boat there. Like I've arbitraged enough where I can pay myself next to nothing and then pay everybody else. Yeah, like I might even consider that, at this point, versus fundraising.
Depends how much time it would take. Yeah.
You're going to buy a nice house with your time?
Well, yeah, exactly, right. With this, well, I mean, basic income probably doesn't even solve that problem if we don't invest in good quality, affordable housing. But this comes back to what Michael was mentioning before about the monetary system and how money comes from banks at the moment, more or less, and one way to get it is to borrow and buy a house, right? Because then the bank's always going to be secure because there's a house. They're more likely to make that loan because there's a house there for them to repossess if you fail on your payments, right? And so one of the things that's doing is it's cheap credit pumps up asset prices. And so people are often surprised to learn that housing isn't counted as part of consumer inflation. The consumer price index doesn't include housing, and there's a logical reason for that. That's because it's not a consumable good; it's an asset, right? And so it goes along. Housing goes along with the stock price, the price of Apple shares, and the complex financial instruments in this category of what rich people buy. So therefore, that's why house prices are high. They're just, unfortunately, it's not actually a home for you to live in. It's actually an asset. It happens to be an asset that you can live in, is the way our current system treats housing. It's a pretty backwards thing. So what and you see it all the time in the news, right? Talking about ideology, you see that house prices go up and they go, good news, house prices are going up. It just got more expensive to live, right? It's good that houses are really expensive. Isn't that crazy? I think about it, if you want to see another of these little moments where you can see the madness of the whole thing, think about a trade war. What's going on with a trade war is China is saying, we want to sell you steel really, really cheap. And we're saying to China, we want to sell you barley really, really cheap. And China's saying, no, we want to pay more for it. And we're saying, no, that steel's too cheap. Charge us more for it. It's too cheap. You're dumping your products, right? Because we don't want you to give us stuff cheap. We want you to give us stuff that's more expensive so that we can compete and we can have the jobs and because it's a fight not to get stuff, but to produce and get and supply stuff. So it's a bit mental. Yeah, Michael.
Yeah, I just go on the production side. At one stage in my life, this wasn't a bullshit job. I was manufacturing manager for Toyota here in Australia, and what I've seen through my manufacturing contacts and keeping track of the world, we are getting to the stage where much, much more of our stuff could be made here using highly automated plants. So we use our own raw materials, we use our own energy, we set it up in a way that's designed to recycle and to use waste as feedstock to other processes. And what we then buy is we only import the designs. So most trade becomes electrons, where you are buying the best in terms of design, and then you're using our highly flexible plants that are situated locally, including 3D printing or additive manufacturing and so on, and other processes to use your local energy and materials and stores to produce here. And under that scenario, it completely changes the whole global trade dynamic.
You see, that would be an efficiency gain. And at the moment, we have to avoid efficiency at all costs, because efficiency would mean that we'd be down to having, 1 hour of work for every adult every week, and no one would have a job, and everyone would starve because everything's so productive.
I don't think people consciously think about it that way. I think it's much more that the people who are in management positions, especially in middle management positions, do not encourage efficiencies that where they lose staff, because their basic staff budget and numbers of people under them, it goes to how well they are paid and how well they are regarded. So, I've seen many times that there are opportunities for really significant efficiencies in government and in business. And it's a case of, and especially in government, and it is to some extent even explicit, that, listen, these jobs are here to pay people. We're not getting rid of them, because what are they going to do if they don't have this job, right? And so that is to my mind, that is much more of a factor than this sort of conspiracy type idea.
Well, it's a little bit what Graeber talks about in terms of, he calls it managerial feudalism, which Stephen brought up as well, where this idea that people want to have people underneath them, and then they're their people, and there's two sides to that.
Right.
They've got a responsibility for them, but they also have this sense of importance of looking, I'm going to take care of
higher pay. Basically, if you've got a bigger department, in the main, not always, but in the main, you'll be paid more than the guy who has a smaller department.
Josh?
One thing that stuck with me from the book is how there are lots of companies that don't need a receptionist, but have a receptionist because you look better if you've got a receptionist.
Prestige, yeah.
And people who are just hanging around at the desk, kind of just waiting for something to happen, and nothing's happening all day. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's sometimes you want to have someone on call, aren't there? Right? But like an ambulance driver, you don't want to be busy. You don't want to have your ambulance drivers busy all the time. You want to have a little bit of slack in the system so that they're standing ready to take calls, but maybe not receptionists. The other thing, Michael, is we went. Oh, sorry, Munley, you've had your hand up. Please go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, it doesn't seem. I don't think I've ever seen like a study about like the costs of the job, all the stuff that we're talking about, like the inefficiencies, and like I really like the point you brought up about how like we want the stuff to cost more, right? So it has so we can be like competitive and everything else, like instead of like this endless job guarantee papers, like why doesn't someone like Josh actually do like a cost of jobs, like what it's really costing us, screwing us to even still have the system?
Yeah, well, look, I actually have written a piece we called the deflationary costs, the deflationary effects of a basic income, which about what are the savings that we'd make from a basic income, which in which I use the phrase having a job is expensive, right? And it's expensive for the whole system. So think about, and I'm just actually going to put this in the chat. It's my article called "Explaining Bullshit Jobs with Monetary Theory." And I think it relates to what Michael's saying and a bit to what you're saying about the cost of having a job to the individual. So you have to, how much of the money that you need from your salary is actually just to pay for the cost of getting to work and work clothes and a house that's close to that job. If you have
that's the thing. That's the thing. Like the problem is it's about UBI, right? Like the problem is the fundamental title and the main subject of the paper isn't just ripping down jobs. Right, that's where it needs to start. Like, maybe you've already done most of it there, right? But I think you should rewrite and reframe it to just like jobs are shit.
Well, I mean, like, I don't even know how to calculate it. I would need someone with much more math skill than me. But like, because I think there's the individual cost and then there's the social cost. So think about the freeways that we build, right? These monster projects that are 14 lane, 25 lane, whatever they are, lane freeways. That's all for to get people to work. So if we didn't have rush hour,
I think like James Jansen and maybe Josh, who are actually like, or the other guy that was on here before, the mathematicians, they could actually model it out, right? That's neither of our areas, I think.
Josh and Peter both have their hands up. Josh, you go first.
Yeah, I was just going to say, so my article about how much a basic income costs, some people read that and they're a little bit frustrated because they want a number. They want it to come to some number they can be like, that's how much it costs. But the real reason I wrote that article, sorry?
Sorry, no, I'll come back, I see it.
But the real reason I wrote that article is because there are all of these other social costs that you can't put a number to it. These are not, you can't sum it down to a number. That was the point that I was trying to make.
It's a bit of a trick, that article.
Yeah. I have written an article where I've tried to get the actual costs in terms of all of the savings that you would get out of, welfare and the different components that could go to make up a UBI where we could actually fund it. So if anybody was interested in the numbers, I could give you the numbers at least I've come up with.
But then how do you? Oh, sorry.
So
how do you put in the cost of somebody being a better friend, like because they've got more time? It's things like that. You really
that's not a cost.
I meant
the
cost of funding it.
Benefit.
I meant the cost of funding it, where people say, how can you afford it? And the numbers that I've done at least would indicate that we could easily afford it in Australia for $500 a week for every person. With at most about a 7% GST additional. But
or you could,
I definitely like to see that. I saw another version where essentially, even when you take the, your accidental link or whatever, it only comes around 2/3 of what you need or
Yes,
whatever, because
yeah.
because of the cost of living, purchasing power. So yeah, definitely what like let's see. By the way, check your messages. We can definitely chat a bit more later.
Okay.
Like I messaged you quite a while back, I think.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, you have to scroll
Okay.
back. Yeah, about Bansi and everything else.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
If
Oh, yeah.
anyone wants to get any links or messages or email addresses out of the chat, we should do it soon because we've now reached the 2-hour mark, which I think is a good arbitrary point for us to start wrapping up, because we could definitely go on probably for another 2 hours and there'd still be lots we hadn't discussed. I think we've done a pretty good job of responding to Graeber's point about bullshit jobs. Do people have any really final closing thoughts that they want to add before we wrap up for the night?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think it just goes to show the importance of really trying to model this out. I think, like, enough of the trials, enough of the experiments. Let's just get this done. So I've actually got a draft of the PowerPoint slides for the hackathon. If you guys are interested in checking out,
I was about to say,
well.
talk everyone through the hackathon for people on YouTube and anyone who hasn't heard about it, what that is and who's organizing it and stuff.
Yeah. At the moment, Singularity University. Essentially it's going to be run by Hackathon Lab, Moonchild Labs over in Estonia. So yeah, those guys are pretty much decentralized. They'll be able to help. They've hacked with policies before. We're getting a raft of sponsors on board, including Deloitte. So the slides there, you can see, the time really is now. There's been enough experiments and trials around the world that's just converted to policy. And the modeling competition will actually have experts, economics experts and data analysts and scientists and UBI enthusiasts like yourselves to actually get involved. And we're going to be targeting it. The winners, this policy will be selected by the sponsors, and they'll be actually going to the political parties in each jurisdiction, in each country, where all the Deloitte networks are, where the TEDx networks are, where the Singularity U networks are, and just get this implemented, because there's enough talking about this sort of things, especially when we're talking about things that potentially we think can't be quantified. The actuarials do this as part of their day job. You lose a friend, right? And it's intangible to you, but the actuarials in court work it out what the compensation should be. And every part of like this sort of stuff can be quantified based on the courts, right? So it's how much variables we can include into this model.
I'm dubious.
Other jurisdictions.
I'm dubious about modeling any of this stuff because there's so much about human behavior involved in it, which is why I like the approach that Michael was talking about earlier, where you start with a small amount and then you see what that small amount does, and you figure out, you iron out the kinks when it's a small amount and it's lower stakes.
The model should be able to take that into account, like to make it more and more complex. So you can start off very basic with the starting variables of population. You've got your participation rates and all of your budget line items for your federal government, and then incorporate variables around what are the secondary, third, and fourth sort of impacts of the UBI.
So for anybody who's watching at home, or watching, not participating, how can they find out and participate? How can they connect and participate in this?
Yeah, join this group. I think it'll give you another update, but we'll be catching up every Friday as a UBI hackathon group. So reach out to myself and Austin. We'll get you involved once this starts ball rolling, because we're getting initial funding for it, and we're aiming by end of the year we should be able to make some announcements too.
Okay, well, we'll definitely have at least one of these sessions dedicated to that event as it gets closer. I think we'll try the event the month before you guys are doing the event or whatever. We'll have a whole 2-hour session just to talk about the hackathon maybe. Josh, now would be a good time for you to plug the action group, I think, before we close up for the day.
Yeah, so I think 4 of the 6 people who are here left know about this event and they'll come along to it. But basically, we've got the discussion group on the Monday, and then the following Saturday is an action group. So on Saturday, we're going to talk about what can we do. There are a lot of people who don't come to this, who do come to that, and trying to progress basic income in the discourse of Australia. And that's where we connect and talk about action. So
if anyone's watching on YouTube, after the fact, what should they, or watching live, don't know what the numbers are, I don't pay attention to that. I'm not that organized. If someone's watching now or watching later, where do they type into their browser? What do they go to find us? You're muted.
you want to find us on meetup.com with Basic Income AU. I could read out the event.
basicincome.au. Sorry, Basic Income AU. Meetup.com, Basic Income AU. Facebook, what's the Facebook address?
You could also go to basicincomeaustralia.com, which is where our website is, and there's links at the top of that page.
Basicincomeaustralia.com. That's probably the best, a good place to leave it. Thanks everyone for coming along and sticking out for the full 2 hours. Thanks to the people who showed up and were here for some of the time, but less of a thanks, just half as much of a thanks because you only stayed half the time. No, we don't measure time and input that way. We're much more liberal and open-minded. Thanks everyone. Have a great night. See you all next month.
Thanks for organising it, guys. Really
Thanks for
appreciate
coming.
it. Ciao. Bye-bye.
Bye.